My mom's boyfriend said he was just detailing my dad's truck until I saw the online for sale listing. My dad passed away 14 months ago, and our family home still smells faintly of him, a mix of old cedar, motor oil, and the peppermint gum he always kept in his front pocket. He wasn't a rich man, but he was meticulous about the things he owned. His absolute pride and joy was his 1994 low-mileage collector's truck. It sat in our garage under a custom flannel cover, pristine and untouched. For my dad, that truck wasn't a utility vehicle. It was a piece of art he spent weekends polishing while listening to baseball games on the radio. After the funeral, my younger brother and I agreed we would never sell it. It was our last physical anchor to him. Then came Vince. My mom met Vince at a local community center event just 6 months after my dad passed. He was a smooth-talking, overly charismatic guy who wore leather jackets that smelled like cheap cologne and carried himself with the unearned confidence of a man who lived off other people's kindness. Within 3 months of their first date, Vince had practically moved into my mom's house. He didn't pay rent, he didn't help with groceries, but he sure loved acting like the man of the house. I hated the way he treated my dad's space, but every time I brought it up to my mom, she would get intensely defensive, her eyes welling up with tears. "I'm so lonely in this big house, Chloe," she would cry. Vince makes me laugh again. "Can't you just be happy that I'm not crying myself to sleep every night?" So for my mom's sanity, I bit my tongue and tried to keep the peace. The real trouble started on a warm Saturday morning when I drove over to my mom's house to help her clear out some old flower beds in the front yard. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the garage door was wide open, the custom flannel cover thrown carelessly onto the concrete floor. My dad's truck was backed out into the driveway. Vince was standing beside the open driver's side door, holding a vacuum cord and a bottle of interior vinyl spray. He was wearing my dad's old favorite grease-stained baseball cap, a detail that made a sharp, sudden knot of fury tighten in my chest. "Vince," I said, walking up the driveway, my voice tight and flat. "What are you doing with my dad's truck?" Vince looked up, completely unfazed. He offered a wide, oily smile and patted the truck's pristine side mirror. "Morning, Chloe. Just doing a little detailing work for your mom. The old girl was gathering dust in the dark, you know? A classic machine like this needs to be cleaned up and aired out properly. I'm just giving it some much-needed love. My dad took perfect care of this truck," I replied, stepping directly between him and the open cabin door. "It doesn't need airing out by you." "And you're wearing his hat," Vince sighed, tossing the interior spray bottle into his detailing bucket with an exaggerated, patronizing air of patience. "Look, Chloe, I get it. You're protective of your father's memory, but I'm just trying to help your mother maintain the property. A vehicle that sits too long rots from the inside out. I'm doing her a favor by getting it ready." "Getting it ready for what?" I asked, my eyes narrowing. "For regular maintenance," he said smoothly, adjusting the cap on his head. "Your mom asked me to handle the upkeep, that's all. No need to get your feathers ruffled." My mom stepped out onto the front porch right then, holding a pitcher of iced tea. She saw the tension between us immediately, and her face fell into that familiar, stressed expression. "Chloe, Vince is just being helpful, honey. He noticed the tires looked a bit low yesterday and offered to check them for me. Please don't start an argument." I looked at my mom, seeing how fragile she still was, how desperately she wanted to believe Vince was just a benevolent helper. I swallowed the rage, forced a rigid nod, and walked into the backyard to start on the flower beds. But as the afternoon went on, a persistent, toxic gut feeling kept scratching at the back of my mind. Vince wasn't a car guy. He didn't even own his own vehicle. He drove my mom's sedan everywhere because his own car had been repossessed 2 months prior. Why was a man who couldn't even manage his own basic transportation suddenly spending hours meticulously cleaning, vacuuming, and photographing a vintage collector's truck? The answer didn't come from a dramatic confrontation. It came from a casual, mindless scroll through my phone while taking a break on the back porch. I opened a local automotive buy and sell group on social media, looking for a spare part for my own car. As the feed refreshed, a brand new listing appeared at the very top of the page, posted less than 20 minutes ago by a user profile named Vince V. My breath caught completely in my throat. The main feature image of the listing was a high-definition photograph of my dad's 1994 truck, parked in our exact driveway, glittering under the afternoon sun. I scrolled through the additional images. There were close-ups of the pristine engine block, the low-mileage odometer, and the perfect leather interior that Vince had just finished vacuuming an hour ago. The description beneath the photos read, 1994 Collector's Classic. Immaculate condition, single owner, zero rust. Moving out of state and must part with this beauty. Asking $24,500 cash only. Serious inquiries only. Title in hand. I sat on the porch step, the phone vibrating slightly in my shaking hands. He wasn't detailing it to preserve it for my mom. He was detailing it to stage it for a quick, untraceable cash sale. He was planning to steal my father's greatest legacy right out from under my grieving mother's nose, and according to the listing, he was claiming he had the legal title ready to sign over. The quiet daughter who kept the peace to protect her mother's feelings died in that exact second. Vince thought he was dealing with a vulnerable widow and an oblivious girl. He had no idea he had just signed the warrant for his own public destruction. I didn't storm into the front yard and scream at him. If I confronted Vince right now with my phone screen in his face, he would simply delete the listing, tell my mom I was monitoring his private internet activity out of spite, and twist the story until my mom apologized to him. He was a parasite, and parasites always know how to burrow deeper into the host when they feel a threat. I needed to know how deep this deception went. I waited waited until late that evening, long after the sun had set and the house had gone completely quiet. I was staying over in my old childhood bedroom for the weekend, ostensibly to finish the yard work. At 1:30 a.m., I slipped out of bed, my bare feet making zero sound against the hallway carpet. My mom's small home office was at the back of the house. That's where my dad had always kept the fireproof document lockbox containing the house deed, our birth certificates, and the official state titles to our vehicles. My dad's keyring, which held the small silver key to that lockbox, was supposed to be hanging on the decorative hook by the kitchen pantry. I crept into the kitchen, the moonlight casting long skeletal shadows across the floor. I reached for the hook. The keyring was gone. A cold sweat broke out across my shoulder blades. I left the kitchen and walked toward the downstairs guest bathroom, the room Vince had claimed as his personal space since moving in. The door was cracked open slightly. On the small counter next to his cheap shaving kit lay my dad's old keyring. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stepped inside, my fingers closing around the cold metal keys, and glided back down the hallway to the office. I knelt by the bottom shelf of the closet, pulling out the heavy black lockbox. I inserted the silver key, turned it until the mechanism clicked, and lifted the lid. I dug through the folders until I reached the section labeled Automotive. The certificate of title for the 1994 truck was missing. I tore through the rest of the box, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. It wasn't there. Vince hadn't just listed the truck online on a whim. He had already physically stolen the legal title from my mom's private records. I sat back on my heels in the dark office, a sickening realization washing over me. In our state, you can't legally sell a vehicle without the owner's signature on the back of the title. My dad was gone, which meant the truck legally belonged to my mom's estate now. For Vince to tell online buyers that he had the title in hand and was ready to close a cash deal, it meant he had either forged my mom's signature already, or he was planning to fake a bill of sale using her identity. I pulled out my phone, took pictures of the empty automotive folder, and locked the box back up. I returned the keys to the bathroom counter exactly as I had found them, my mind spinning with a calculated freezing rage. The next morning at breakfast, I watched Vince act out his daily performance of the loving, supportive partner. He poured my mom's coffee, kissed her cheek, and spoke about how he was planning to paint the back deck next week to freshen up the place. Vince is so handy. Chloe, my mom said, her eyes shining with that desperate, fragile gratitude as she looked at him over her mug. I don't know what I would do without him around to handle these big projects. Your father always handled the heavy lifting, and I felt so lost before Vince stepped in. Vince smiled, a smug, self-satisfied look creeping into his eyes as he looked across the table at me. It's no trouble at all, Eleanor. I just want to make sure you're taken care of. In fact, I have to run some errands this afternoon to look at some pricing for the deck paint. Might take me a few hours. I knew exactly what his errands were. I had checked the online marketplace listing right before coming downstairs. The post had already received multiple inquiries, and Vince had replied to a buyer named Marcus, scheduling a private meeting at a vacant supermarket parking lot 3 miles away at 2 p.m. today to inspect the vehicle and finalize the cash paperwork. That sounds great. Vince, I said, offering a tight, pleasant smile as I cleared my plate. Take all the time you need. Mom and I have plenty of yard work to keep us busy here. He had no idea that while he was planning a secret rendezvous to liquidate my father's memory for $24,000 in cash, I was already dialing the local sheriff's department non-emergency line to report a grand theft auto and document forgery in progress. Vince wanted a quick, quiet cash deal in a dark parking lot. Instead, he was about to get a front row seat to his own public arrest. The hours between breakfast and 1:30 p.m. felt like a slow-motion countdown. I kept my mom busy in the backyard, helping her pull weeds and plant fresh hydrangeas along the fence line. I needed her entirely occupied so she wouldn't notice Vince sneaking into the garage to take the truck. At exactly 1:45 p.m., the heavy rumble of my dad's vintage engine echoed from the front of the house. The sound pierced through me like a physical knife. It was a deep, distinct roar that I had listened to every Saturday morning of my childhood. My mom paused, her garden trowel hovering over the soil, her brow furrowing in confusion. Is Vince driving your father's truck? He told me he was taking my sedan to the hardware store. I wiped the dirt from my gardening gloves, keeping my voice completely calm, steady, and light. Oh, he probably just wanted to take it to the gas station to put some fresh fuel in it, Mom. You know how he is about maintenance. Don't worry about it. Let's finish this row of flowers before the sun gets too hot. My mom hesitated, then nodded, accepting the lie because it was easier than questioning the man she trusted. I felt a pang of intense guilt for lying to her, but I knew that if she intervened now, Vince would make up an excuse, return the truck, and find a stealthier way to sell it next month. The infection needed to be drawn out completely so it could be destroyed. The moment my mom turned her back, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I had already coordinated with an old friend of my dad's, a retired local police officer named Deputy Miller, who still worked part-time with the County Auto Theft Task Force. I had sent him screenshots of the online marketplace ad, the empty document lockbox, and the specific location of the vacant supermarket parking lot. He just left the house in the vehicle, Deputy, I texted. He's heading to the Old Plaza parking lot on 5th Street. The buyer is supposed to meet him there at 2 p.m. We're already in position with 2 unmarked units, Chloe, Miller replied a minute later. The moment he produces that stolen title or takes a cash deposit for a vehicle that isn't registered to his name, we're moving in for a felony arrest. Do you want to be there? I'm bringing my mother, I typed back, my fingers steady. She needs to see exactly who she's she led into her house. At 2:10 p.m., I dropped my shovel into the dirt and stretched my back. Hey, Mom, I completely forgot. I need to run to the old plaza on 5th Street to pick up some specialized fertilizer for these hydrangeas. Why don't you come with me? We can grab a cold coffee on the way. My mom wiped her forehead, looking tired but happy to spend time with me. That sounds lovely, honey. Let me just wash my hands. 10 minutes later, my mom was sitting in my passenger seat, chatting about her plans for the summer, completely oblivious to the fact that we were driving toward the execution of her relationship. As we approached the commercial district, the familiar cracked asphalt of the abandoned shopping plaza came into view. The vast parking lot was mostly empty, except for a silver sedan and parked directly next to it, my dad's beautiful red and white vintage truck. Vince was standing between the two vehicles, leaning against my dad's driver's side door with his ankles crossed, looking incredibly smug. He was talking to a middle-aged man in a baseball cap who was holding a heavy brown paper envelope. Vince was holding a crisp blue piece of paper, the missing state certificate of title. My mom's chatter stopped instantly. Her eyes locked onto the red and white truck, then onto Vince, then onto the blue document in his hand. Chloe. Her voice dropped into a trembling, fragile whisper, her hands gripping the dashboard as I pulled my car into a parking space 50 yards away, keeping the engine running. What is Vince doing? Why does he have the truck title? I kept that locked in the office. He's selling it, Mom, I said, my voice dropping all the soft, protective pretense, turning into a hard, clinical declaration of truth. He listed Dad's truck online yesterday for $24,000 cash. He stole the key from the bathroom, took the title from the safe, and he's finalizing the sale right now. No, my mom breathed, her eyes widening in pure, agonizing denial, tears instantly spilling over her lashes. No, he wouldn't. He told me he loved this family. He told me he wanted to help take care of things. Watch, I said quietly, pointing through the windshield. Before my mom could even unbuckle her seatbelt, two dark SUV cruisers deactivated their stealth profiles, their red and blue emergency lights violently flashing against the sun-bleached asphalt as they sped from behind the old grocery storefront, trapping Vince and the buyer in a tight, inescapable box. The sudden eruption of police sirens and flashing lights turned the quiet, empty parking lot into a localized vortex of absolute panic. Vince's smug posture vanished in a microsecond, his knees visibly buckled, his head snapping around like a cornered animal as Deputy Miller and 3 uniformed officers exited the cruisers, their hands resting firmly on their service holsters as they advanced with measured, lethal precision. Hands where I can see them. Step away from the vehicle! The command echoed across the cracked pavement, loud and clear through the open windows of my car. The buyer dropped the brown paper envelope of cash onto the hood of the silver sedan, his hands flying into the air as he backed away, shouting that he was just an innocent internet buyer who didn't want any trouble. But Vince was frozen. His face had gone a sickening, chalky green color, his fingers still clutching the blue certificate of title like a child caught holding a stolen toy. Chloe, please. We have to go down there, my mom sobbed, her voice a ragged, hysterical mess as she opened the passenger door. There must be a mistake. He couldn't do this to me. I didn't try to stop her this time. The protective shield needed to be ripped away completely. I turned off the engine, stepped out of my car, and followed my mom as she ran across the hot asphalt toward the flashing lights, her sneakers scuffing loudly against the stones. Vince, my mom screamed, her voice cracking with a raw, agonizing grief that sounded worse than the day my dad died. Vince, what are you doing with Arthur's truck? Vince turned his head toward the sound of her voice. When he saw my mom running toward him, with me walking less than 5 paces behind her, the last remnant of his smooth, manipulative mask completely dissolved, his eyes filled with a desperate, ugly panic. Eleanor, tell them to stop, Vince yelled, his voice cracking as Deputy Miller grabbed his right arm, forced him against the side panel of my dad's truck, and began clicking a heavy pair of steel handcuffs around his wrists. It's a misunderstanding. I was just getting an appraisal for the estate. I was trying to surprise you with the money to pay off the house repairs. Your daughter set me up. An appraisal? Deputy Miller barked, pulling the blue document from Vince's sweaty fingers and inspecting it under the sunlight. He turned back toward my mom, his expression filled with a deep professional gravity. Eleanor, this is a legal state title, and looking at the back of it, someone has already signed your name on the seller line. Did you sign this document over to Vince Vance today? My mom stopped dead in her tracks, less than 10 feet away from the man she had shared a bed with for the last 6 months. She looked at the blue paper in the deputy's hand, then looked down at Vince's hands locked behind his back in steel cuffs. I didn't sign anything, my mom whispered, her voice dropping into a hollow, breathless realization as the weight of the betrayal finally broke through her denial. I haven't opened that lockbox since Arthur died. Vince, you swore you didn't even know where the keys were. Eleanor, please. I did it for us, Vince whined, his body sagging against the truck as the officers began searching his pockets, pulling out his wallet and the keys to my dad's vehicle. We needed the cash. Your daughter has been trying to drive me out since day one. She's ruining your happiness. I stepped forward, standing directly next to my mom, my eyes locked onto Vince with zero pity, zero hesitation. He didn't do it for you, Mom, I said, my voice steady, loud, and clinical. I pulled out my phone and held the screen up, displaying the marketplace listing for the entire parking lot to see. He listed the truck as his own. He told buyers he was moving out of state and needed a quick cash disposal. He was going to take that $24,000 and vanish the second the cash hit his hands, leaving you with an empty garage and a forged felony record. The buyer in the baseball cap looked at Vince with absolute disgust. You piece piece of trash. You told me your wife died and you were selling her late father's inheritance to cover the medical bills. I brought 24 grand in verified cash for a thief. Vince didn't have an answer. He looked down at the asphalt, his jaw working silently as Deputy Miller read him his rights, guided his head down, and pushed him into the hard plastic back seat of the primary cruiser. The heavy door slammed shut with a definitive metallic thud, sealing him away from our lives forever. The ride back to my mom's house was completely silent. My mom sat in the passenger seat, her hands resting limply in her lap, her eyes staring blankly out the window as the suburban streets blurred past. The illusion of her second chance at love hadn't just ended. It had been dismantled by a team of county sheriffs in a vacant parking lot. I drove my car, while Deputy Miller's partner followed behind us, driving my dad's red and white truck back to its rightful place in the garage. When we pulled into the driveway, my mom didn't move for a long time. She just watched the officer back the truck into the stall, carefully lower the garage door, and hand me the keys along with a formal evidence receipt for the forged title document. "Thank you, Miller," I whispered to the officer as he tipped his cap and drove away, leaving the neighborhood to settle back into its quiet, deceptive afternoon peace. I guided my mom inside, sitting her down at the kitchen island. I poured her a glass of water, but she didn't touch it. She just looked around the kitchen, at the coffee mug Vince had used that morning, at his dirty running shoes left by the back door, at the small space on the wall where my dad's key ring was now hanging safely back on its hook. "How could I be so stupid, Chloe?" she whispered, her voice sounding incredibly small, old, and fractured. "I let him into our lives. I let him wear your father's clothes. I defended him when you told me something was wrong. I was just so tired of being alone in the dark. I wanted to believe someone cared about me." I walked around the counter, pulling her into a tight, protective embrace. "You weren't stupid, Mom. You were grieving. Men like Vince are predators. They look for homes where the light has gone out, and they use that darkness to slide right in. You didn't do anything wrong. He's the monster. Not you." She wept against my shoulder for an hour, the raw, heavy release of a woman who had finally stopped running from her reality. Once she had cried herself into a quiet exhaustion, she went upstairs to lie down. I knew my work for the day wasn't finished. The parasite was gone, but his toxic trail was still buried in every room of our house. I needed to perform a complete inventory of his betrayal. I spent the next 3 hours going through the house with a garbage bag and a cardboard box. I started in the guest bathroom, tossing his cheap toiletries, his cologne, and his clothes into the plastic bag. But as I went through the drawers of the nightstand he had been using, I realized the truck wasn't the first thing he had taken. Hidden beneath a stack of his spare socks was a velvet pouch that belonged to my mom. Inside were 3 pieces of vintage gold jewelry, anniversary gifts my dad had given her over their 30 years of marriage. Vince hadn't sold them yet, likely hoarding them as secondary assets for when he needed quick cash down the line. In his leather travel bag, tucked in the back of the closet, I found a notebook. Inside were handwritten notes detailing the monthly payout schedule of my mom's widow survivor benefits, a rough calculation of the equity left in our family home, and a list of local pawn shops with their weekend operating hours. He hadn't just been planning to sell a truck. He was systematically mapping out the complete financial liquidation of my mother's entire life. He was going to bleed her dry piece by piece until there was nothing left but an empty house and a broken heart. I took high-resolution photos of the notebook pages, the stolen jewelry, and the hidden bag, adding them to the digital folder I was preparing for the county prosecutor's office. Every single scrap of paper was another nail in the legal coffin Vince had built for himself. As I walked down the stairs with the heavy black garbage bag of his belongings, intending to throw it straight into the curbside bin, I looked at the garage door entry. The house was quiet again, truly quiet for the first time in 6 months. The thick, suffocating smell of his cheap cologne was already beginning to fade, replaced once again by the faint, comforting scent of cedar and old wood. The parasite was officially evicted, and the long, messy process of real healing was finally ready to begin. 6 months passed like a quiet, steady rebuilding project. The legal system worked with a cold, satisfying efficiency that Vince's smooth talking couldn't derail because of the ironclad digital trail, the marketplace timestamps, the server IP routing, the physical recovery of the forged title at the scene, and the stolen jewelry recovered from his room. Vince Vance pled guilty to felony grand theft, identity forgery, and grand larceny. The judge, noting his extensive prior record of fraud across 2 neighboring counties, sentenced him to 4 years in a state correctional facility with 0 opportunity for early parole. He was officially locked away behind steel bars, stripped of his smooth words, his leather jackets, and his prey. My mom didn't attend the sentencing hearing. She didn't need to. She had already closed that chapter of her life the moment the cruiser door slammed shut in the plaza parking lot. The recovery wasn't fast, and it wasn't cinematic. It involved a lot of long, quiet Sunday dinners, slow conversations on the back porch, and family therapy sessions where my mom finally learned to unpack the massive, terrifying weight of her sudden widowhood without relying on the dangerous validation of strangers. She began to reconnect with her old friends from her art group, slowly pulling her old, vibrant, creative self out from behind the polished, quiet shell she had adopted to please Richard and Vince. Today was a crisp, bright Saturday morning in November, exactly 1 year since the weekend Vince had backed my dad's truck out into the driveway under the pretense of maintenance. I pulled into my mom's driveway, the autumn leaves rustling against the tires of my car. The front yard looked beautiful, the hydrangeas we had planted that stormy afternoon now resting quietly for the winter, their roots deep deep and secure in the soil, I walked toward the garage. The door was open, but the atmosphere inside was completely transformed. The space was clean, organized, and brightly lit. My dad's old baseball radio was sitting on the workbench, playing a low, familiar tune. My younger brother was leaning over the engine bay of the 1994 red and white truck, a socket wrench in his hand, his face smudged with a bit of dark grease. Sitting on a stool nearby, holding a clean microfiber cloth and a bottle of chrome polish, was my mom. She was wearing an old denim shirt of my dad's, her hair tied back in a messy bun, her face completely relaxed, peaceful, and clear. "Hey, Chloe," my brother called out, looking up from the engine with a wide, genuine smile. "Just checking the spark plugs before the winter storage hits. Mom's handling the detailing today." I walked into the garage, the familiar grounding scent of motor oil and cedar wrapping around me like an old blanket. I looked at my mom, who stood up from her stool, wiping her hands on her apron. "How's she running, Mom?" I asked, leaning against the side panel of the truck. My mom looked down at the gleaming chrome bumper, her reflection staring back at her, clear, steady, and entirely independent. "She runs beautifully, honey. Your brother says the transmission is in perfect shape. We're going to take her for a drive down the county highway this afternoon to keep the fluids moving." She reached out, her fingers brushing against the steering wheel inside the open cabin. On the dashboard, sitting in a small, permanent custom holder my brother had installed, was my dad's old grease-stained baseball cap, the one Vince had tried to wear to play his fraudulent role. It was back where it belonged, a silent, respected monument to the man who actually built this life. "I used to think that keeping this truck locked away in the dark was the only way to protect your father's memory," my mom said softly, her eyes looking into mine with a deep, unshakable clarity. "I was so afraid of the empty spaces he left behind that I let a thief tell me what my future should look like. But I see it now. The things your dad left us aren't things we have to hide or be afraid of losing. They're the foundation we use to keep moving forward." I smiled, a warm, thick emotion rising in my throat as I reached across the truck bed to squeeze her hand. Her palm was warm, strong, and completely steady. "We didn't sell the truck, and we never will. It stays in the garage, a beautiful piece of machinery that connects our past to our present. But it isn't an artifact of grief anymore. It's a symbol of our survival." As my brother turned the key in the ignition, the powerful, deep roar of the vintage engine filling the clean garage and echoing out into the bright autumn air, I looked at my family. The light in our house was back on, the doors were locked against the predators of the world, and the road ahead belonged entirely, unshakably to us.